the prince of Pan-Africanism, Dr. Umar Johnson. Give it up for Dr. Umar Johnson. Give it up, give it up, give it up.
Black power, brothers and sisters. Black power. Black power. Let us always remember that it's not how many are in the war, it's how committed those in the war are. Every movement that has ever graced the face of this earth, and every time, every climate, every continent, you can never find a movement that was not started by a small group of determined individuals who have made up their mind that their time has come. It was that way in the past, and it will be that way in the future. Brothers and sisters, it's an honor to be back in Jackson, Mississippi. Obviously, like so many of your brothers and sisters on the East Coast, and those down in the Midwest, and those on the West Coast, and even in the Deep South, not too far from where you are now, we follow the developments in Jackson, Mississippi. And we follow them with a very keen eye. Not only because we love our brothers and sisters here in Jackson and throughout the great state of Mississippi, but because we know that whatever they do in Jackson, they're likely to replicate it around the country. Jackson, Mississippi is our blackest major city. And we have to remind ourselves how Jackson became to be one of our blackest major cities. In the 1970s, the Jackson, Mississippi School District finally decided to obey the edict that came from the United States Supreme Court that said that the public schools had to be integrated with all deliberate speed. Of course, most school districts refused it. Most school districts stalled on it. But finally, in the 1970s, Jackson, Mississippi started that process of desegregating the public schools. That very same decade, Jackson saw about 10,000 white families, or 10,000 white citizens rather, pack up and leave the inner city of Jackson, Mississippi for a life in one of the surrounding suburbs. And they enrolled their children in some of the white private schools that were being built in and around Jackson, Mississippi. This was not only true for Jackson, but it was true for all of Black America, from Philadelphia to New York, from Boston to Atlanta, to Washington, D.C. to Little Rock. When the schools began desegregating, white people pulled their children out and sent them to private schools in other places. So when white people left Jackson, 10,000 plus in the 1970s, the state legislature systemically stopped investing in Jackson the way that it had done prior. We not only saw this in Jackson, but we saw it across the country. Now, the argument is often made that the reason why majority black cities don't get the funding that they are entitled to is because of the laws of a tax base, the laws of property tax that resulted from white flight. Well, that might be partially true, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. Despite the fact of white people leaving the inner city, that should have nothing to do with the state legislature investing in the best interests of all of its cities. And to prove the hypocrisy of the argument that Jackson would have more money if more white people stayed around, is we can look at many of the gentrified black cities across the country today, from Philadelphia, Seattle, Atlanta, and other places. Even when white people return to majority black cities, we do not see an increase in infrastructure development for black people. We don't see an increase in the funding for public schools. Why am I bringing this up right now? As black people are dealing with a racist, apartheid type of a system in the form of the Capitol Complex Improvement District. Nothing more than a version of 21st century apartheid, where the ruling government dominated by white people. And we have to be honest that this is a racial issue. The 112 Republicans who passed laws here in the state of Mississippi, every last one of them are conservatives. Of the Democrats, you have about 58. And of those Democrats, 54 are black. So some people will look at this as a Republican versus Democratic issue, but I look at it for what it is. It's a white power versus black power issue. And the reason the white Republicans of Mississippi do not want to invest in Jackson, Mississippi appropriately is because Jackson is 80% black.
All right now.
They are not interested in empowering or funding a predominantly black city. And as I look and study the situation here in Jackson, Mississippi, what I see is an intentional campaign by the state legislature of Mississippi with the governor at the top of that power structure who wants to make life for black people so miserable and make life for black people so destitute and make life for black people so unbearable in Jackson, Mississippi that we simply pack our bags, get up, and move away. Make no mistake, the water crisis would not be a water crisis if Jackson was an 80% white town. Make no mistake, the water crisis is not the result of poor legislation by the mayor. It's not the result of a black city council. It's not the result of poor municipal decision making, because the Jackson water crisis is decades in the making. And you can trace it back to the decade of the 1970s, when the white state legislature of Mississippi, which has always been overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly racist, especially in the past 50 years, they made a conscious decision to divest from Jackson, Mississippi. And to prove how much they dislike the black citizens of Jackson, to prove how much they don't care about black life in Jackson, you can look at this Capitol Complex Improvement District. I mean, why would you need to carve out a section of a city that already has a mayor, that already has a police district, that already has its own democratically elected judges? Why would you need to carve out a section of that city and make that section only accountable to the state legislature itself? Why would you need to put judges in place who are not elected by the people? Why would you need to put a police chief in place who is not elected by the people? Why would you need to put a prosecutor in place who was not elected by the people? The writing on the wall is very obvious and very clear, and even a blind man can see it. Yes. You are usurping power from the Democratic elected mayor, Chokwe Lumumba. You are usurping power from the black members of the city council. You are usurping power from the black-led police district. You are usurping power from the black judges who were democratically elected. You don't want the white people of Jackson to be accountable to the black power structure of Jackson, and to prevent the white people and the white businesses and those white power brokers from having to answer to a majority black city infrastructure. You decided to create your own predominantly white infrastructure. Now, I'm not a master of the law, but something about this sounds unconstitutionally sound. Somebody has to show me where it is legal in this country to be able to take power from a democratically elected municipality and put it in the hands of unelected white people, to rob black people of their power who were elected and give it to unelected white persons. That is disrespectful, it is ignorant, it is unconstitutional, but it is absolutely in keeping with the racist history of the state of Mississippi. Now, you say you don't have enough money, but if we go across the state of Mississippi and we look at all of these different counties here, understanding that allegedly Mississippi is the poorest state in the country, allegedly, but yet and still, this state legislature right here in Jackson, this white, conservative, Republican, and racist state legislature right here in Jackson always finds a means to fund programs all over the state of Mississippi. You always find a way to solve the problems of white folks across the state of Mississippi. But when it comes to Jackson, a capital city that you claim you love, you cannot find the money. In every attempt by Mayor Lumumba and the Jackson State Council, City Council, to try to raise money, every strategy that's put before you is always struck down by the state legislature. So you clearly don't care about black people. You may care about the city of Jackson, but you care nothing for the people who live in the city of Jackson.
That's right.
And your claim for why you need this capital complex improvement district rests on the fact that you say there's too much crime that is not being judicially processed in a timely manner. You claim that there's not enough police on the streets of Jackson, so you had to help them out with your own capital city police. A group of police who, as I read in the media, have been complained upon by the black citizens of Jackson more than a dozen of times for being too aggressive, too hostile, too racist, and too white supremacist in their mindset, in their conduct, and in their behavior. Now, if you care that much about the crime in the state of Jackson, as I heard one of the state legislatures with the last name of Umar, who actually chaired one of these bills that sought to expand the jurisdiction of the Capital Complex Improvement District, he said he was carjacked in Jackson. And him being carjacked in Jackson, allegedly, helped motivate his desire to pass a bill to expand the size of the district, but to also make sure that there were police in that district that did not have to answer to the mayor, and that there were judges and prosecutors in that district that were not accountable to the city council. Well, if you care that much about crime, why not attack the causes of crime? If you want to reduce crime, you don't add more police. If you want to reduce crime, you don't add more judges. If you want to reduce crime, you don't hire more prosecutors. Crime is not a function of the judiciary. Crime is not a function of the police. Crime is a function of miseducation and economic strangulation. So if you want to reduce crime in Jackson, where 25% of my brothers and sisters live under the poverty level, and we all know where there's poverty, there's crime. That is as true for white people as it is for black people. So if you want to reduce the crime, what is your plan to improve the school system? A school system where almost every school in the city of Jackson is short at least one teacher. And from what I read, the teacher shortages in Jackson were made even worse in the post-COVID reality. What are you doing to keep the classroom staffed with licensed, experienced, credentialed educators? What are you doing to reduce the rate of black boys in Jackson, Mississippi, who are being placed in special education, who are being placed in classes for the educably mentally retarded, who are being suspended and expelled for reasons that could be considered unjustifiable? What are you doing, Mississippi State Legislature? If you care so much about crime, what are you doing to put the industrial building trades back into Jackson's high schools so that when our sons and daughters graduate, they don't necessarily have to go to Jackson State. They don't necessarily have to go to Alcorn State. Maybe they need to go to a trade school. Or better yet, maybe they should graduate with their tradesman or tradeswoman license and go straight into the world of work or into the world of entrepreneurship. Once upon a time, you didn't need a college education to live a comfortable life. You could become a plumber. You could become a carpenter. You could become an electrician. You could become an auto mechanic. You could become a roofer. You can become a welder and a whole host of other trades. But those programs that once prepared young black men for a life of gainful employment in the building trades, those programs were stripped from our high schools. Yes. They were taken out. Yes. And you can trace the rise of crime in Jackson and any other majority black city to white flight, school desegregation, and the stripping away of meaningful building trade programs from the inner city black high schools. In essence, what I am saying is the crime in Jackson, Mississippi, that this state legislature so hypocritically presumes to be concerned about was actually created and at least approved by this very same state legislature. You created the crime when you took the building trade programs out of the high schools. You created the crime when you systemically stopped funding the infrastructure of Jackson. You created the crime by not making sure the school system here in Jackson, Mississippi remained competitive with school districts all across this country. You created the crime by giving birth to one of the highest unemployment rates in the entire United States of America. Don't talk to me about crime if you're not going to talk to me about the causes of crime. Don't talk to me about crime if you're not going to talk to me about the economic empowerment of the black citizens of Jackson, Mississippi. We need jobs. Black people need work, and not the fast food restaurant type of work, but the livable wage type of work. You could eliminate crime in Jackson almost overnight, state legislatures, by creating industry and business opportunity that would put black people to work. One thing I know about crime, having been a therapist, one thing I know about crime, going into our nation's prisons, people don't commit crime because they want to. People often commit crime because they have to. Crime is a function of desperation and economic marginalization. So if this Mississippi state legislature, if those 112 Republicans upstairs really care about crime in Jackson, can you please show me the employment bill for Jackson, Mississippi? Can you please show me the entrepreneurship bill for Jackson, Mississippi? Can you please show me the homelessness bill for Jackson, Mississippi? Can you please show me the program that is going to repair, rebuild Jackson, Mississippi public schools? Show me the program that will take our people from unemployment to gainful employment. And if you're not talking about jobs, if you're not talking about entrepreneurship, if you're not talking about economic opportunity, but yet you continue to cry about crime and use those cries as a justification for your racist apartheid-style takeover of Mayor Lumumba's government, then you can be deemed and described as nothing more than a hypocrite. But with that being said, brothers and sisters, we have to understand that we too are responsible for what's going on. Many of these state legislation sessions are open to the public, but how many black people show up? Many of these state legislature sessions, they're open to our community leaders, but how many black community leaders actually show up? One of our weaknesses as black people, I don't care if you're in Jackson, I don't care if you're in Montgomery, Alabama, I don't care if you're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I don't care if you're in Little Rock, Arkansas. One of our weaknesses as a people is we do not lobby. We do not lobby. We do not lobby those in office to carry out our agenda. We hope, we pray, we vote, we march, and we beg, but we do not use our political power to try to transform our political situation. We almost never use the black dollar to build political power. We almost never do that. So let us be very clear about something. White racism cannot succeed without black complicity. White racism cannot succeed without black docility. White racism cannot triumph over the lives of black people unless black people are willing to lay down under the foot of white supremacy. This coming weekend, on Monday, April the 3rd, we will celebrate 55 years since the good Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his final and most famous speech, the speech that said, "I've been to the mountaintop." And what a lot of us don't understand is the reason Dr. King was assassinated by the United States government in cooperation with the Memphis Police Department, the Memphis Fire Department, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, and the CIA, as well as the Green Berets of the U.S. Army. All of this is in court documents if you want to go take a look. I'm going to say that again. Dr. King was assassinated with the cooperation and participation of the U.S. Army, the FBI, the CIA, the Memphis Police Department, the Memphis Fire Department, and the U.S. government itself. Dr. King was murdered because Dr. King's next agenda item was economic redistribution of America's wealth. Dr. King famously said to his friend, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, "What good is it for us, Ralphie, to fight for black people, to have a seat at the lunch counter, if black people cannot afford to pay for the meal at the lunch counter?" Dr. King knew that civil rights was meaningless without economic justice. And they had to murder Dr. King because Dr. King was about to force a fundamental reorganization of capitalism to the benefit of not only African people in America, but people of every culture. Here we are, 55 years later, and black America is still suffocating under economic apartheid. And we have to make sure that as we fight for justice here in Mississippi and elsewhere, we have to make sure as we fight for equality here in Mississippi and elsewhere, we have to make sure that as we fight for our due share of the resources in Mississippi, that we keep an eye on the economics of Mississippi. What percentage of state contracts in Mississippi go to black people? We have to know these things. Very important. When is the last time the state secretary of education in Mississippi was a black person? This is important. Not just so we have black faces in high places, because Lord knows black America has not benefited from black faces in high places, but it does show that there is some concern for proper representation of African people. As I prepare to round this out, Jackson, Mississippi, I wish deep down in my soul that every black person in Jackson would come together, stay together, and stand together under the principles of African solidarity and force this Mississippi state legislature to do what is in the best interest of Jackson, Mississippi. They did not need a Capitol Police Force. They could have simply provided Mayor Lumumba with more police, since he had already admitted that the Jackson Police Force was understaffed. He cannot control that. Why not just support the mayor in office? Why did you have to create your own separate police force? The mayor had already said that the judiciary of Jackson was working as hard as they could to process the different civil cases and criminal justice cases. But if he's understaffed and underfunded, he can only do what the money that he has allows him to do. Why not give him more prosecutors? Give him more judges. Give him more resources. Give him a larger budget if you really cared about Jackson. Truth is, your agenda is the elimination of black people from Jackson, Mississippi. And one of the biggest reasons you needed your own police force is you need to make sure that the police of Jackson, Mississippi can lock up more black people and get them off the street. Catch them with more drugs or no drugs so you can get them off the street. The reason you needed your own police was to fill up the prisons, exacerbate the prison overpopulation problem here in Mississippi. You needed your own police so you can begin to do what? Push black people off their land. Brothers and sisters, the water crisis, the Capitol Complex Improvement District, these unelected judges and prosecutors, these police who are not hired by the mayor of Jackson, this is all a plan by white racism in Mississippi to force black people out of the city of Jackson, Mississippi. It's a tough job they have because Jackson is 80% black. It's a tough job they have because the poverty is 25%. They got a long road ahead of themselves to rid themselves of black people in Jackson. But we need to understand, it is not an impossible goal. They can do it, and they will succeed if we do not organize. The most honorable, Marcus Garvey said, the greatest weapon used against Negroes is disorganization. Malcolm X said, black people are not outsmarted, black people are out-organized. Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture said, if you organize a little, you get a little done. If you organize some, you get some done. But if you don't organize at all, you don't get anything done. Brothers and sisters, the future for empowering black Jackson, Mississippi is to organize. And when we organize, brothers and sisters, we cannot organize on solely religious lines. Christians cannot be elitist towards non-Christians. Non-Christians cannot be elitist towards Christians. Light-skinned blacks cannot afford to be elitist towards dark-skinned blacks. And dark-skinned blacks cannot afford to be elitist towards light-skinned blacks. Educated Jacksonians cannot afford to distance themselves from uneducated Jacksonians. We have to be very clear that one of the ways we have made it so easy for racism to trample over the rights of black life is because of the petty differences that we have amongst us as a race. Skin color problems, education problems, religious problems, fraternal problems, employment schisms, neighborhood schisms, and every other schism. We suffer from enough isms for us not to be adding additional ones on top of the evil we have to fight already. We need to start holding meetings in every major city section of Jackson, Mississippi, bringing our brothers to the meetings if we got to. I mean, drive around in the cars like Stokely Carmichael and them used to do. Like Snick and Core used to do. What are you doing, brother? I'm going home. No, you're not. Get in the car. You're going to the meeting. Where you going, elder? I'm going to choir practice. Not tonight, because the choir ain't saving black folks. Only Black Power will do that. Get in the car and let's go to this meeting. We have to start acting like we are living in a state of emergency, because Jackson, Mississippi is in a state of emergency. And you will not be able to transform this state of emergency if you don't treat it like it is an emergency. Frederick Douglass said, if black people want justice, you have to make sure that your issues, your challenges, your problems, the racism that you suffer from, you have to make sure your issues are so loud, so broad, so well articulated that no other issue in the state of Mississippi will take precedence over the racism that Black Jackson is facing right now. If you don't make Black Jackson the priority at the state legislature, if you don't make the water crisis, if you don't make the racist apartheid Capitol complex agenda, if you don't make that a critical issue for Jackson, Mississippi, it'll never be taken seriously by the rest of this country. I want to close by first saying this. To the 54 Democratic state legislatures here in the state of Mississippi, to those 54 black Democrats who I know care about their people, I have to ask the question, why are you still a member of the Democratic Party when the Democratic Party is not coming to the aid of Jackson, Mississippi? I don't mean to be disrespectful. I don't mean to chide or deride. But when they come to work in this building behind me every day, they walk in here as black Democrats. They are proudly identifying themselves as members of the Democratic Party. So I have to beg the question, what is the Democratic Party doing for Black Jackson that has earned your loyalty so much so that you have not demanded the Mississippi State Democratic Party or the National Democratic Party to step in and stand up for what's being done to black people in Jackson, Mississippi? I am of the opinion that those 54 legislators here in Jackson, Mississippi, who represent the black community, it is time for them to have a private caucus and think real deeply as to whether they should continue to be members of the Democratic Party. What has President Joe Biden done about the water crisis? What has he said against the Capitol Complex Improvement District, which is really nothing more than a Capitol Complex gentrification district? What has the president said or done? What has the National Democratic Party said or done? The Democratic Party has done nothing to help Black Jackson, Mississippi. So I beg our 54 black state legislators to rethink your membership in that party. I would even have to beg the mayor to rethink his membership in that party. I would have to beg all black elected officials across the country. Why does the Democratic Party get so much unquestioned loyalty from black people when it has done so little for black people? We started voting overwhelmingly Democrat in the 1930s, 1933 to be exact. That means in 2033, in 10 years, we will have voted overwhelmingly Democrat for an entire century. Can somebody please explain to me, what has the Democratic power structure done to earn that type of loyalty from black America? If we are ever going to get free, if there is to be a physical freedom, an economic freedom, a political freedom, a social freedom, if there is to be any kind of freedom for black people in Mississippi and throughout this country, there must first be a psychological freedom. If you do not see yourself the psychological equal of the white man, you will never become it, because you have to know who you are in order to get what you deserve. And if you don't know who you are, you will never get what you are entitled to. And if black people don't stop second guessing their black nature, you will never be respected by the rest of human nature. Brothers and sisters, I close by giving the quote of my ancestor Frederick Douglass. Frederick said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom but deprecate agitation are like men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain but can't stand thunder or lightning. They want the ocean, but they're scared of the awful roar of the waves." Frederick said, "A man may not get all that he pays for, but you will pay for everything that you get." And if we as a people are ever to become free of the injustices inflicted upon us in this country, we have to pay for their removal. If we want to alleviate the water crisis, we got to pay for it. If we want to alleviate the racist capital complex agenda, we got to pay for it. If we want better schools and end to police brutality, we got to pay for it. And Frederick Douglass said, you may have to pay with money, you may have to pay with words, you have to pay with actions, you might got to pay by going to jail, you might got to pay like Medgar Evers by giving your life. But you will have to pay, because power concedes nothing without a demand. He said, for 20 years I prayed on my knees to the good Lord for freedom. But the good Lord gave Frederick no freedom until I got up off my knees and began praying with my feet. Queen Mother Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. James Baldwin said, to be black in America and to be somewhat conscious is to be like almost in a rage all the time. James Baldwin said, to be born in a land that's free, but to be born not free is to be born into a lie. Brothers and sisters, the most honorable Marcus Garvey said, God never intended African people to be a race without authority. And it is our job under God as African people to build ourselves into a race with authority. What we need in Black America right now is one city, one community, one group of black people to be the example for everybody else. When I travel the country, I was in Lansing, Michigan the other day, in Kalamazoo, in Terre Haute, Indiana. I'll be in Memphis on Sunday and Monday. And then I got to go to the Caribbean islands. But everywhere I go, even in the Caribbean, they say, Dr. Umar, can you show us one city that's doing it right? Can you show us one city that's fighting racism and building for a better black tomorrow? And unfortunately, nowhere in this country do I find black people who are fighting systemic injustice as aggressively as we should, and at the same time building for a better black tomorrow as aggressively as we should. And we must do both. To fight racism and don't build for yourself is hypocrisy. To build for yourself and not fight racism is a mockery. We have to do both. I'll leave you with the words of Queen Mother Ancestor Rosa Parks. She said, when I refused to give up my seat that day, it wasn't to start a movement. It wasn't even able to make a social change. I had just made up in my mind at that moment that I was a woman, a human being, and no man had no right to ask a woman to give up her seat. Black power, black power, black power. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
Thank you, brother Dr. Umar Johnson, for coming down here. Thank all of y'all for coming down here. We're going to have a march. We're going to walk around Mississippi Street. We're going to come back up Congress Street. And then we're going to reconvene tonight at the African Art Gallery. Sister Prim, do you have anything to say? You want anything to add, Sister Prim? Black power. Free the land. Free the land. Free the land. By any means necessary. We're gonna have some photos of Dr. Umar Johnson. Photos, Dr. Umar Johnson. Want all of y'all get a chance to